I never thought silence could feel stolen. For 40 years, the dawn on Thornfield land had sounded the same. Cattle lowing in the distance, dew hissing under my boots, the whistle of a train that cut through Millbrook County on its way to nowhere special. But that morning, when I stepped out onto my porch with black coffee steaming in a chipped enamel mug, the silence had been replaced by something wrong, something polished, rehearsed. Children's laughter, lawn mowers, the tinny jingle of an ice cream truck. I froze halfway down the steps of my 1952 farmhouse. The horizon shimmered not with fog, but with rooftops, rows and rows of rooftops where there should have been rolling pasture. I rubbed my eyes like an old fool, thinking maybe I'd woken into someone else's dream. But the smell confirmed it. Asphalt, fresh paint, chlorine from a pool I'd never dug. An entire neighborhood had bloomed on my land like a cancer while I was away. My name is Ezekiel Thornfield. Folks just call me Zeke. I'm 67 years old, stubborn as rusted barbed wire, and a last living Thornfield farming these hills. My grandfather broke this soil in 1924. My father bled on it. My wife, Martha, is buried beneath it. To me, this land is not dirt, it is memory. And yet, as I stood in disbelief, there was driveways, basketball hoops, manicured lawns with plastic flamingos. When my cattle once grazed, a golden retriever chased a frisbee. And looming over it all, a stone arch with fancy lettering, Heritage Meadows Estates. A subdivision. On my property. The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the limestone. Coffee bled into the dirt like a warning. I should have felt anger, but what hit me first was grief. Like someone had bulldozed not just my pasture, but my history. My grandfather's oak tree stood in the distance, scarred with initials Martha carved into it the summer we married. Beyond it, the creek where I taught my boy to fish. All of it swallowed by cookie-cutter houses wearing vinyl siding like cheap disguises. And then came the sound of tires crunching gravel. A white Lexus rolled toward me, gleaming like a shark in the sun. Behind the wheel sat Victoria Ashworth, or Vicky, as she styled herself in town. She was the kind of woman who never met a mirror she didn't trust. Blonde highlights, tailored blazer, clipboard clutched like scripture. HOA president, wife of a councilman, and, if whispers were true, the most feared gossip in 3 counties. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She stopped just close enough to make me swallow dust, then leaned out her window with a smile that belonged on a brochure, not a human face. "Sir," she said, voice dripping with manufactured patience. "You can't be here. This is a private community." Her words snapped something inside me. I looked around at my land, my creek, my oak, the hills my family had protected for nearly a century, and I realized she believed every word. "This is Thornfield land," I said, my voice low, steady, the way my grandfather had taught me when arguing with men who carried deeds in their pockets. "Always has been, always will be." Her laugh was the sound of glass breaking. "Oh, Mr. Thornfield," she cooed, finally calling me by name as if that gave her authority. "You're confused. Heritage Meadows was purchased fair and square. We have the paperwork." She lifted her clipboard like a weapon, tapping it as though ink on paper could erase generations of blood and sweat. The arrogance was blinding. And yet, beneath her polished words, I caught something else in her eyes. Calculation. She wasn't surprised to see me. She was annoyed. Like I was a loose end she hadn't planned for. I stepped forward, boots grinding gravel. "Ma'am, I've walked every fence post of these 847 acres. I've mapped them, surveyed them, kept records since before you learned to spell HOA. You can call me stubborn. You can call me old. But don't you dare call me confused." Her smile vanished. For the first time, I saw the steel beneath the bleach. The subdivision sprawled behind her like a stage set, families unpacking boxes, children drawing chalk flowers on driveways, innocent players in a scheme they didn't understand. But I understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was theft. The silence of my land had been stolen, and with it, my peace. What Vicky Ashworth didn't know, and what she was about to learn, is that you never steal from a Thornfield. Not when we've spent generations measuring every inch of this earth. Not when our history runs deeper than her concrete foundations ever could. Because this story wasn't going to end with me backing down. It was going to end with me taking back everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the yellow lamplight flickering against Martha's china cabinet, staring at the deed my grandfather signed in 1924. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but his name, Ezekiel Thornfield, Sr., still carried more weight in my hands than all the marble columns of the county courthouse. My fingers traced the words like scripture. I remembered Grandpa's voice. Land ain't just property, Zeke. It's memory. Every acre holds stories, and every story is worth protecting. But memory didn't stand much chance against bulldozers and politicians with hungry pockets. When the sun finally cracked the horizon, I strapped on my old leather boots and slung my surveying gear across my shoulder. Some men carry rifles into battle. I carry tripods and measuring tape. They're sharper weapons than people think. I walked the fence line, only to find it gone. Ripped out, bulldozed flat, swallowed by the sprawl of heritage meadows. In its place stood freshly planted hedges and ornamental fences painted white, like they were trying to cover up a crime with suburban window dressing. Neighbors, my neighbors on my land, waved politely as if I were some curious passerby. Kids pedaled bikes down asphalt streets, poured across my pasture. A mother with a stroller smiled at me. No idea she was pushing her child across soil soaked with Thornfield sweat. But it wasn't them I blamed. It was her. By noon, word had already spread that the old farmer was causing trouble. I returned home to find a county deputy waiting on my porch, Deputy Mike Ashworth, Vicky's brother-in-law. His mirrored sunglasses reflected back my own fury as he handed me a folded paper. A restraining order. I unfolded it slowly, my knuckles whitening with every line. It claimed I'd trespassed on their property, threatened families, brandished dangerous surveying equipment, as though a steel tape measure were a weapon of mass destruction. Mike smirked when I looked up. Best you stay clear of heritage meadows, Zeke. Folks don't want you spooking their kids. Spooking, I spat, jabbing the paper back at him. That land's been mine since before you were born, boy. He leaned in close, the sour smell of tobacco thick on his breath. Maybe, maybe not. But the way I see it, there's 100 families over there who believe the Ashworths, and one old man who doesn't. Numbers don't lie. He left, boots crunching on gravel, leaving me holding a piece of paper that declared me a trespasser on my own land. By evening, the whispers had grown teeth. On the Sweetwater Springs community Facebook page, Vicky posted side-by-side photos, my weathered farmhouse against glossy shots of heritage meadows. Her caption dripped with sugar-coated venom. We welcome everyone to our new community. Though sadly, some refused to move on from the past. The comments were merciless. Outsiders called me a bitter hermit, a dangerous old man. Some said I was sabotaging progress, holding back the American dream. My family's land, reduced to a thread of gossip. I sat on the porch until the fireflies blinked awake, fighting the urge to break something. Martha would have told me to keep my temper, to be patient. She always believed truth had a way of climbing to the surface, like seeds sprouting after a hard frost. But patience has its limits. That night, I pulled out my grandfather's ledgers. Every survey, every boundary line, every notation of creeks, stones, and oaks marked across 80 years. I had proof stacked higher than a man's pride. And yet, proof meant nothing if the whole county was bought and paid for. I needed more than memory. I needed an ally. The next morning, as I was patching a section of roof, a car pulled into the drive. Not the polished Lexus of Vicky, but a dusty Toyota with a Nashville Tribune bumper sticker crooked on the back. A woman stepped out, jeans tucked into boots, notebook in hand. "Mr. Thornfield?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. "Name's Ruby Morgan. I've been covering local corruption for the Tribune. And after seeing last night's broadcast painting you as a lunatic, I figured something didn't add up." I studied her for a long moment, tried to gauge if she was another vulture circling my carcass. But her eyes weren't slick with calculation like Vicky's. They burned with curiosity. "What makes you think it's not true?" I asked. Ruby flipped open her notebook. Because liars always talk too much, and yesterday Vicky Ashworth talked for 5 uninterrupted minutes. I want to hear your side. Her words settled in me like a steadying hand on my shoulder. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than anger. Hope. Ruby sat at my kitchen table, the same place where Martha once shelled beans in the evening light. The room smelled of old wood and strong coffee, the kind of air that carries both comfort and ghosts. She had spread out my grandfather's ledgers across the table, flipping pages with the precision of a surgeon. These records are meticulous, she said, tapping her pen against a survey dated 1972. Every boundary, every creek line. You've documented this land better than the county itself. I nodded, though pride fell hollow now. Meticulous won't stop bulldozers. Ruby leaned back, eyes sharp. No, but fraud will. And from what I've seen already, their paperwork stinks like a fish market in July. Her certainty steadied me. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that truth might finally claw its way through the lies. But belief has a way of turning to ash when tested. That night, I heard the first shot. It cracked across the pasture like a whip, startling the cattle into a frenzy. I grabbed the rifle my father left me and stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding harder than my boots on the steps. A second shot rang out, closer this time. The bullet sparked against the mailbox at the edge of my drive, shredding the tin into curling metal. A warning. Accidents happen to stubborn old men. A voice jeered from the dark. Laughter followed, fading into the hum of an ATV tearing away through the fields. I stood in the night with the rifle heavy in my hands, staring at the ruined mailbox. For the first time since this battle began, doubt gnawed at me. I wasn't just fighting for land anymore. I was fighting for my life. The next morning, Ruby snapped photos of the bullet holes while muttering curses that would make a preacher blush. They want to scare you off, she said. Classic intimidation. It's working, I admitted, surprising myself at the honesty. I buried my wife on this land, Ruby. My kids are gone. I've got no one left but cattle and memories. Maybe it's not worth. She slammed her notebook shut, cutting me off. Don't you dare finish that sentence. If you quit, they win. And worse, you'll have taught every thief in Tennessee that an honest man's legacy can be stolen with a fake signature and a few threats. Her words struck like a hammer. Martha's voice echoed in my head. Zeke never backs down from what's right. But right then, I felt more tired than stubborn. By noon, the threats escalated. Dead possums left on my porch. Nails scattered across my driveway. Calls in the dead of night where silence hissed through the line before a voice whispered, "Tick-tock, old man." Fear began to seep into me in places I thought were unbreakable. Every creak of the farmhouse sounded like footsteps. Every shadow at the window felt like a rifle aimed at my back. That evening, I sat in Martha's garden, staring at her roses. The blossoms had grown wild since she passed, spilling over the fence in a chaos she would have loved. I whispered into the twilight, "I don't know if I can win this, Martha." And that's when the real twist came. Ruby returned from the courthouse with a folder so thick it looked like it could smother the truth or set it ablaze, depending on who held it. She spread the documents across my table, her hands trembling with a mix of fury and exhilaration. "Zeke," she said, her voice shaking, "they didn't just forge your deed. They built their entire subdivision on a rotten foundation of lies. Fake notary stamps, shell companies, even insurance scams. And here's the kicker." She slid a yellowed contract toward me, older than both of us combined. My grandfather's name was stamped across the top. Clause 7. Any unauthorized structure erected upon Thornfield land shall transfer ownership to the Thornfield estate in perpetuity. My breath caught. My grandfather had seen the future, and he'd left me a weapon sharper than any gun. "Zeke," Ruby whispered, leaning close. "Legally speaking, every house, every driveway, every mailbox in Heritage Meadows belongs to you." The room tilted, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the cicadas outside. All at once, fear turned to something else. Not peace, not relief. Something heavier, sharper. Responsibility. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd stolen from 100 families who trusted liars with their savings, their futures. If I used this contract, I wouldn't just reclaim my land. I'd own their homes, too. And with that realization came the turning point I hadn't seen coming. This wasn't just a fight for land anymore. It was a fight for justice and for the souls of everyone caught in Vicky Ashworth's web. The days that followed felt like living under siege. Every corner of my land carried signs of intrusion. Security cameras hidden in trees. Motion sensors buried near the creek. At night, headlights lingered at the end of my drive before disappearing into the dark. The silence I once cherished had turned into a battlefield of whispers and paranoia. Ruby called it psychological warfare. "They're trying to break you before the law can save you," she said, typing furiously at her laptop while files stacked around my kitchen. Classic strategy. Paint you unstable, drive you out, and scoop up whatever's left. She wasn't wrong. Each morning, I found new evidence of their campaign. Slashed tires, poison feed left near my cattle trough, anonymous letters stuffed in my mailbox, scrawled with threats that smelled of cheap whiskey and desperation. But what cut deepest wasn't the intimidation. It was the sight of children playing in driveways, chasing kites across fields where my cattle once grazed. They didn't know their homes sat on stolen ground. They didn't know their HOA queen was feeding them lies. And now, by law, I own those homes. That truth weighed heavier than the threats. If I enforced my grandfather's contract, I could reclaim every inch. But it would also mean evicting families who had no part in Vicky's scheme. Young couples who'd sunk their savings into mortgages. Mothers decorating nurseries. Veterans planting flags in their front yards. Justice for me could be ruin for them. One night, sitting at the edge of Martha's garden, I spoke into the darkness as if she were there beside me. What would you do, love? Tear down their dream to honor ours? Or find a way to carry them both? The roses rustled in the breeze, offering no answer. Ruby's voice broke the silence. She'd been standing on the porch, listening. "Zeke, you can't carry the weight of every family on your shoulders." I looked up, weary. Maybe I have to, because Vicky sure won't. And if I don't, then I'm no better than the thieves who started this mess. She stepped closer, her notebook under her arm. Then we do both. Expose the fraud, hold the guilty accountable, and protect the innocent. It won't be easy, but justice never is. Her conviction steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the old fire stirring again. We worked through the nights, building a fortress of evidence. Every forged stamp, every falsified deed, every dollar funneled through shell companies. Ruby traced money trails with the patience of a saint, while I pored over survey lines until my eyes burned. We set up trail cameras to catch security guards trespassing, recorded late-night calls, cataloged every threat with time and GPS stamps. The file grew thick enough to crush a desk. Proof not just of theft, but of conspiracy that reached into the courthouse, the council chambers, even the sheriff's office. But proof has a way of drawing blood. 2 weeks in, I woke to smoke. The barn glowed orange, flames licking the sky. The smell of burning hay sharp as betrayal. By the time the fire trucks arrived, nothing remained but charred beams and ash. My cattle bawled in terror as sparks scattered into the fields. The deputy shrugged. "Probably faulty wiring," he said, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. Ruby whispered the truth once we were alone. "They're escalating. Next time, it won't be a barn." Fear gnawed at me again, but beneath it came something stronger. Rage. I stood at the blackened ruins, fists clenched, and swore to Martha's memory that this would end. Not with me backing down, but with their empire in flames. That vow carried me into the storm. Ruby returned from Nashville with word that federal investigators were circling. Environmental violations, money laundering, even whispers of international fraud. But federal wheels turned slow, and Vicky knew it. So she staged her final performance. Flyers went up around town. Heritage Meadows Family Festival. A celebration of community. Barbecue, music, bounce houses for the kids. A chance to showcase the strength of honest families against outside threats. In bold letters at the bottom, special guest appearance. Councilman Brad Ashworth, and HOA President Victoria Ashworth. Ruby slammed the flyer down on my table. This isn't a festival, Zeke. It's a stage. They're going to paint you as the villain in front of the whole county. I stared at the smiling cartoon houses on the page. Somewhere in me, fear stirred again, but alongside it came clarity. No, I said slowly. It's not their stage. It's mine. If they want the county watching, then the county's going to see the truth. Ruby met my gaze. That's the climax, isn't it? Public, undeniable on their turf. I nodded. They wanted a festival. I'll give them one they'll never forget. Festival day arrived with skies too blue, the kind of perfect Tennessee morning that feels staged. The scent of barbecue and cotton candy drifted across the stolen fields, masking the rot beneath. Heritage meadows sparkled like a postcard, red, white, and blue bunting strung across porches, balloons bobbing in the heat, a choir of children singing as though innocence could wash away fraud. At the center stood a gazebo dressed like a throne, and on that throne, Victoria Ashworth, hair sprayed into golden armor, smile painted wide, a microphone in her hand as she spoke to the crowd. Her words carried syrup, but her eyes carried steel. "We're here today," she declared, "to prove that families, not bitterness, define Sweetwater Springs. To prove that progress cannot be stopped by one man's confusion." The crowd cheered, some genuinely, others with the unease of people clinging to denial. I waited at the edge of it all, my grandfather's surveyor compass heavy in my pocket, the old contract folded like scripture in my hand. Ruby stood beside me, her camera crew ready. My heart thudded not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Because this wasn't about land anymore. It was about memory, about truth, about the 100 families who'd been tricked into planting their lives in poisoned soil. I stepped onto the stage. The crowd hushed, whispers buzzing like hornets. Vicky's smile faltered just for a flicker. "Mr. Thornfield," she said into the mic, her tone a dagger wrapped in velvet. "You weren't invited." I took the microphone from her hand. My voice was gravel but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I stand here not as a relic, not as a bitter old man, but as the rightful steward of this land. And I have proof." Gasps rippled as I held up the yellow contract. The paper looked fragile, but the words were iron. My grandfather signed this in 1924, long before any of us were born. Clause 7, clear as the Tennessee sky. Any unauthorized structure built on Thornfield land transfers ownership to the Thornfield estate. Every house, every driveway, every streetlight. By law, they belong to me. The crowd erupted, shouts of disbelief, cries of betrayal. Children clung to their parents, not understanding why the ground under their feet suddenly felt stolen twice. Vicky lunged for the microphone, but Ruby's crew lit up their cameras, catching every desperate move. "Lies!" Vicky screamed, her veneer cracking. "This is all lies. He's trying to destroy your homes, your families." That's when Ruby stepped forward. Calm, precise, she spread evidence across a table. Photographs of forged notary stamps, bank statements looping into shell companies, environmental surveys buried under bribes. Every page projected on a screen behind us, undeniable. Then came the sound of radios crackling. Federal marshals moved through the crowd with the quiet authority of men who had waited too long to act. Handcuffs gleamed in the sunlight. Councilman Brad Ashworth tried to bolt, but 2 agents caught him mid-stride, his face collapsing from smugness to panic as cameras rolled. Vicky, still clutching her clipboard, turned to the crowd, her mask finally gone. "You don't deserve these homes anyway," she shrieked. "Ungrateful, ignorant fools. Without me, you'd still be living in dirt and trailers." Her words cut deeper than any lie. Mothers gasped. Fathers stiffened. Children looked up at parents who suddenly realized the woman they'd trusted despised them. The marshals closed in. Vicky thrashed, screaming about conspiracies and government plots. But the handcuffs clicked anyway, metal against manicured wrists. And for the first time in months, I felt air fill my lungs without the taste of fear. I raised the contract high, my voice carrying over the stunned crowd. This land is not stolen anymore. It is reclaimed. But hear me now. Your families are not my enemies. You are victims of a lie, just like me. And I will not leave you homeless. Together, we will rebuild. On truth. On justice. For a long moment, silence hung over Heritage Meadows, heavier than smoke after fire. Then a single clap broke it. A mother with tears streaking her face, clutching her daughter. More followed, and then the sound swelled. A fractured crowd finding voice, not in celebration, but in raw release. As the marshals led Vicky and Brad away, Ruby whispered at my side, "This isn't just a win, Zeke. It's a reckoning." She was right. Because in that moment, under bunting, balloons, and the acrid scent of barbecue smoke, the facade of Heritage Meadows crumbled. And from its ruins rose something stronger. Truth, broadcast live, unstoppable. The war for my land had ended, but the battle for justice had only just begun. 6 months later, Heritage Meadows no longer gleamed with manicured lawns and fresh paint. It stood like a ghost town under the Tennessee sun, yellow EPA tape flapping against broken fences, playgrounds rusting under silence. The bounce houses and balloons were gone. In their place, weeds crept through cracks in the asphalt. Where families once cooked out on patios, frogs sang again in the wetlands that had been smothered by concrete. And my cattle grazed where they belonged. Justice had been delivered in the way justice always comes, slow, bruising, and incomplete. Brad Ashworth faced 20 years for fraud and racketeering. Vicky, stripped of her pearls and her power, traded her Lexus for an orange jumpsuit and a steel bunk. Their names, once whispered with fear in town meetings, became a cautionary tale spat with disdain. But the victory wasn't clean. Families who had trusted the Ashworths were left shaken, their savings gutted, their forever homes declared worthless shells. Some packed up and left, chasing stability elsewhere. Others stayed, stubborn as I once was, working with me on new agreements to rebuild their lives on firmer ground. They hadn't stolen from me. They'd been stolen from, too. And I would not let my legacy crush theirs. We drew up rent-to-own contracts, fair ones this time. A handshake deal wasn't enough anymore. Every page bore notarized stamps that would withstand centuries. Watching young couples plant gardens again, this time on honest soil, reminded me that land is more than ownership. It's stewardship. Ruby's reporting turned the story into national headlines. The surveyor who measured justice, one paper called it. Her documentary played on late-night TV. Footage of Vicky's arrest replayed until the smug mask fell from memory. She won awards, but she never let it make her proud. The awards don't matter, she told me once. What matters is that a community didn't vanish under lies. She was right. Still, when the noise of reporters and agents finally left, quiet returned to Thornfield land. Real quiet this time, the kind that belongs. I sat on my porch at dawn, coffee steaming in my hands, listening not to lawnmowers or ice cream trucks, but to the low rumble of cattle, the splash of the creek, the wind rattling oak leaves carved with Martha's initials. Grief still lived here. So did memory. But now, so did renewal. The settlement money and seized assets built more than legal victories. They built the Martha Thornfield Library, where young men and women learn how to defend what is theirs: land, dignity, history. They built a scholarship fund for first-generation students, because no one should have to sell their soul just to chase a better life. They built a wildlife sanctuary across 400 acres, where salamanders return to breed in the wetlands Vicky once buried. Children walk the boardwalk now, pointing at turtles sunning on logs, their laughter carrying through the reeds, not as theft this time, but as restoration. And me? I teach surveying at the community college. Young hands grip measuring tapes and GPS trackers, and I tell them the lesson my grandfather told me. Accurate lines keep honest men honest. And when liars cross them, you fight with proof, not with fists. The nights are still hardest. That's when Martha's absence presses closest. I walk to her grave as the sky fades purple and gold, kneel beside her roses, and tell her about the day. The victories, the setbacks, the families learning to trust the land again. Sometimes I think I hear her voice in the wind, soft and steady. Zeke never backs down from what's right. She was right, too, because this story was never about land alone. It was about history, stolen and reclaimed, about families caught between lies and truth, about the stubbornness it takes to face down power and corruption with nothing more than paper, patience, and faith. The Ashworths thought they could bury memory under concrete. But memory outlives greed. It grows back through cracks in the pavement. It sings in the frogs returning to a wetland. It whispers in a grandfather's contract pulled from dust and honored by his grandson a century later. When dawn breaks now, I breathe it in, honeysuckle on the breeze, dew on the grass, the metallic tang of well water. The land has healed. So have I in my own jagged way. And though I'm an old man, I know this. When they tried to steal my land, they weren't just stealing dirt. They were stealing my family's story. And I took it back.